Imagine stepping off a gondola, right? You're stepping into the humid, kind of salt-tinged air of a Venetian night in, let's say, 1926.
Oh, setting the scene immediately. I love it.
Yeah, you're walking up the marble steps of this massive Palazzo Rezzonico, and inside, I mean, the sheer sensory overload is just staggering.
Right, because it's the Roaring Twenties. It's loud.
Exactly. The jazz band is blaring this frenetic Charleston crystal champagne coupes are just clinking incessantly everywhere you look.
And it's packed with, like, the loudest, most flamboyant people imaginable.
The absolute most aristocratic socialites of the lost generation, and they're all, fighting desperately for each other's attention.
Sounds completely exhausting, honestly.
It really does. But here's the thing. As you scan this chaotic, roaring room, your eyes inevitably land on the actual center of gravity.
And it's probably not who you'd expect, right?
Right. It's not the tallest man. It's not, the loudest woman holding court.
Mm-hmm.
It is a slight, impeccably tailored man with perfectly manicured hands just sitting quietly at a piano.
Sitting quietly in the middle of all that chaos.
Yeah. Whispering a joke so softly that the screaming aristocrats around him actually stop talking just to lean in and listen to him.
That is just such a powerful image.
It really is. And today, we are stepping right into that room. We're going to meet Cole Porter.
I am so ready for this.
Because, you have probably heard that old protective piece of advice that gets handed down through the generations, right? Never meet your heroes.
Oh, yeah. Always a massive risk.
It is. And the logic makes sense, honestly.
Yeah.
We build these towering geniuses up in our minds. We fall in love with their art, their lyrics, their public mythos.
Right. We create this idealized, untouchable version of who they just must be.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the fear is that if you actually walk up to them, and shake their hand, the genius just flattens out.
Yeah, the towering figure becomes utterly ordinary, or the charm feels super rehearsed.
Or, even worse, you find out they are just cold and arrogant in real life.
Which happens a lot, unfortunately.
It really does. So for this deep dive into the source material, we are thrilled to bring you episode 60 of the podcast Porter-Pedia, which explores the life, work, and world of Cole Porter.
And we have a very special treat for you today.
We really do.
Yeah.
Because when it comes to Cole Porter, I mean, the undisputed king of sophisticated champagne-soaked wit, that fear of disappointment is just so much sharper.
Oh, absolutely. The stakes are way higher.
Right. So our mission today is to test that old warning. We are going to paint a vivid, meticulously researched picture of what it would actually be like to walk across that Venetian palazzo, cross the threshold, and meet Cole Porter face to face.
Allowing you to make up your own mind about the actual man behind the myth.
Exactly. And before we plunge into this roaring 20s drawing room, I'm going to mention something crucial.
Oh, right, the book.
Yes. If you find yourself wanting to explore Porter's genius even further after this, you should definitely pick up a copy of the Porter-Pedia book.
It's honestly such an incredible resource.
It really is. It explores and explains all 2,600 references he uses in his legendary songs.
Yeah.
I mean, it is an absolute must-read to truly grasp the sheer scale of his intellect.
You really can't appreciate his work fully without it.
Totally. So, to guide us on our journey today, we are using this fascinating biographical and psychological text titled Meeting Cole Porter.
Which is just a brilliant piece of writing.
It really is. It strips away a century of mythology to show us the actual human being seating at that piano.
What's fascinating here is that the fear surrounding a hypothetical meeting with Cole Porter wasn't just like a fear of him being boring.
Right, it was deeper than that.
Yeah, it was almost a profound aesthetic and moral fear. You really have to put this into the context of what he represented to people.
Because he wasn't just a songwriter. He was an entire vibe.
Exactly. This is the man who wrote with such blinding, just effortless elegance. He projected this dazzling offhand superiority to the mundane world.
Yeah, I mean, this is the guy who could sit down and casually rhyme Mahatma Gandhi with Napoleon Brandy.
Right, and make it sound like the most natural, unforced thought a human brain could possibly produce.
Which is insane when you actually think about it.
Totally insane. So the absolute terror for any admirer walking up to him in that palazzo would be that this champagne sparkle, this incredible lightness of being, would simply evaporate in the flesh.
Like it was all just a parlor trick.
Exactly. Fans worried that without a piano and sheet music to hide behind, he would just be a cold, vain, or perhaps entirely decorative little man.
Like you'd expect the wit to be confined purely to the paper.
Right. But the historical evidence from the source text paints a picture that is far more elusive, incredibly complex, and, frankly, far more interesting than him just being a simple fraud.
Okay, let's unpack this from the very first physical second. We are starting at the absolute logical beginning of any human encounter, right? The visual scan.
The first impression.
Yeah, you walk up to him in this palazzo. What is the very first thing you notice?
Well, the source material paints a picture that totally shatters the modern archetype of, like, the dominating celebrity.
Right, he was not physically imposing in the slightest, was he?
Not at all. The historical record describes him as a, and I quote, slight sensitive fellow.
Which is so surprising. If you were expecting a broad-shouldered, booming, theatrical leading man, like a Hemingway type taking up half the room, you were looking in the completely wrong corner.
Yeah, Hemingway would be breaking things. Porter was the exact opposite.
But what he lacked in sheer physical volume, he apparently made up for in this intense, almost intimidating fastidiousness.
Oh, his grooming was legendary.
They are talking about a man whose fingernails were, without fail, neatly trimmed and polished to a shine.
Always.
And he was impeccably dressed. But the text makes it clear it went so far beyond just tossing on an expensive tuxedo, right?
Yeah, that distinction between just wearing clothes and inhabiting a complete aesthetic is really vital here.
Like it was an extension of his soul.
Exactly. The text makes this brilliant observation about his spatial presence. He didn't enter a room like a storm. He never threw open the double doors and demanded that all eyes turn his way. Instead, he settled into it.
I love that phrase, settled into it.
It's so evocative. What drew your attention wasn't his volume, his height, or his physical footprint. It was his finish.
His finish, like a piece of fine furniture.
Yes. Everything about the man radiated this sense of being adjusted, calibrated, and refined to the absolute millimeter.
Wow.
If you looked at him, he would have seemed entirely correct. And I don't mean correct in a stiff, oppressive Victorian formality sort of way.
Right, not like he was uncomfortable in a starched collar.
No, I mean a profound, almost mathematical sense of rightness.
Okay, that's fascinating.
Even before he opened his mouth to greet you, he conveyed this deep, unshakable assurance that he knew exactly how things ought to be arranged socially, visually, aesthetically.
And that he himself was arranged perfectly within that framework.
Exactly.
But hold on, let me push back on that for a second.
Sure, go for it.
Because the elite parties of the 1920s and 30s, the exact circles Porter was moving in across Paris, Venice, and New York, they were notoriously unhinged.
No, completely wild.
Like the Fitzgeralds are jumping in fountains, people are shouting over blaring jazz bands. The alcohol is literally blinding some people because it's Prohibition-era bathtub gin.
Absolute chaos.
So how does a guy with a slight build and a quiet demeanor actually command a room full of loud, wealthy, completely uninhibited socialites?
It's a great question.
It just feels like the physics of the room dictate that a quiet, small man should just be entirely drowned out and ignored by everyone.
It seems counterintuitive, I know. But if we connect this to the bigger picture of social dynamics, it actually makes perfect sense.
Okay, lay it on me.
Porter proved that true magnetism absolutely does not require high volume. In fact, volume is often a sign of desperation.
Oh, that's so true. The loudest person is usually the most insecure.
Right. When a room is entirely chaotic, loud, and spiraling out of control, the person who is perfectly quiet, entirely contained, and immaculately placed becomes a sort of black hole in the room.
A black hole. Because they absorb the attention.
Exactly. They become the center of gravity.
Yeah.
People are naturally drawn to contrast.
And he was the ultimate contrast to a roaring 20s party.
His absolute control created a contrast that pulled people toward him. He didn't try to fight the noise of the room by shouting over it.
He just sat precisely in the center of it.
Yes, radiating this inevitable placement. It's the difference between shouting to be heard and whispering so softly that everyone else realizes they have to stop talking if they want to be let in on the secret.
I love that analogy. It's the gravity of silence.
It really was his superpower.
So, okay, you lean in,
Yep.
right? You've been captured by this quiet magnetism, and now he actually speaks to you. What does Cole Porter actually sound like?
Well, again, based on his Broadway success, you might expect a really theatrical booming voice.
Right, like someone projecting in the back of the theater.
But the text infers his voice was highly controlled, very conversational, and likely carried that very specific lightly inflected cosmopolitan tone.
Oh, like that transatlantic accent.
Exactly. That accent that wealthy Americans acquired after spending a decade drifting through European high society.
Kind of like Cary Grant, but maybe softer.
Yeah, very precise. It shaped the space between you rather than overwhelming it.
And once he starts talking to you, we hit his actual social presence, which is where things get really wild.
Oh, yes.
How does he engage with you as an individual? The source text points out something fascinating. It says his greatest gift wasn't actually his rhyme scheme or his melodies.
Which is a huge claim for a legendary
It's a
composer.
wild claim. But it says his greatest gift was his uncanny ability to adjust himself to others. He possessed this incredibly calibrated charm.
It was a highly managed, intensely conscious charm, for sure.
And we have proof of this, right?
We do. We see the mechanics of this most clearly in his surviving letters, which serve as a phenomenal psychological resource for understanding his interpersonal dynamics.
What do the letters show?
They reveal that he didn't just have one static Cole Porter personality, he had many, and he deployed them depending entirely on who was on the receiving end.
So he was kind of a chameleon.
Very much so. For instance, when he was writing to his intimate male friends, his tone completely shifts.
How so?
He could be exuberant, flirtatious, and flamboyant. He really let the glittering, mischievous side of himself off the leash.
Okay, but what about with others?
But when he was writing to his female friends, the tone dial turns completely. He becomes gently charming and affectionate.
Almost like a comforting confidant.
Exactly. And the critical takeaway from the source material is that these weren't contradictions. He wasn't being insincere.
So it wasn't fake.
No, they were precise calibrations. He didn't so much express a raw self as he tuned himself to the exact frequency of the person he was engaging with.
I have to admit, that raises a major red flag for me.
Really? How come?
Well, if a person is constantly sliding the dials of their personality up and down, you know, flirtatious over here, deeply comforting over there, cynical with this group, earnest with that one, doesn't that just make them a manipulative fake?
I can see why you'd think that.
Like, if you tune your personality for everyone, you don't actually have a personality of your own. You're just a mirror reflecting what people want to see. How can we say he had any authentic relationships at all?
That is the exact trap that many critics fall into when analyzing highly social figures, but the source text argues that it misunderstands the nature of his tuning.
Okay, set me straight.
It's not about being a sociopath or just a blank mirror. It's about high-level emotional intelligence and aesthetic control. Think of it like a musician playing a piano. You don't strike the heaviest bass chord when you want to convey a delicate emotion.
Right.
And you don't play a light trill when you want to convey doom. Porter treated human interaction as an art form that required the right chords.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense.
He wasn't faking his affections. He was simply selecting the most appropriate facet of his genuine personality for that specific person.
And his humor operated on this exact same principle of precise selection, right?
Completely.
Because we do have proof that this wit was ingrained in him very early on. I mean, long before the Parisian palazzos, back when he was an undergraduate at Yale, he was literally voted the most entertaining man in his class.
Which is no small feat at Yale in that era.
No. And the source text mentions his comic songs from his college days already possessed a, quote, satiric edge as sharp as a razor blade.
But even then, the humor wasn't blunt force trauma.
No, the text specifically says his humor glided.
Collided is the perfect verb to describe his social presence.
It really is.
He was never the guy standing at the head of the dinner table, dominating the conversation for 10 minutes to deliver a loud, sweaty anecdote that demands a roaring punchline.
No, he wouldn't want that kind of clumsy attention.
His humor was all about strategic placement. A quiet, razor-sharp remark dropped here, a perfectly turned observation whispered there.
Each one landing with a kind of inevitability.
Exactly. The text explicitly notes that laughter followed him not in explosive, disruptive bursts, but in ripples.
Ritter.
You would hear a quiet comment, you would chuckle, then the person to your left would catch the joke, and the amusement would just sort of wash organically over the room.
That is so elegant.
But beneath that effortless, rippling laughter, if you were observant enough, you would sense the intense control.
Because it wasn't just happening to him.
Right. He wasn't just experiencing a fun party. He was actively constructing the delight of the room in real time.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting for me.
Let's hear it.
If you were sitting there with him, sipping your gin, absolutely entranced by this man who seems to have been wearing a tuxedo and holding a martini,
Right.
radiating this perfectly tuned charm.
Yeah.
You have to start wondering why.
Where does it all come from?
Yes. Where does this absolute, almost obsessive need for control actually come from? Why does he feel the need to be so tightly managed to construct delight rather than just naturally feeling it like a normal person?
Well, to answer that, the source text takes us all the way back to his childhood in Peru, Indiana.
Which is a wild place to start for the most cosmopolitan man on Earth.
It really is. It is a fascinating, almost gothic origin story. We see these two incredibly powerful opposing forces in his early life.
Set the stage for us.
On one side, you have his mother, Kate, who completely doted on him and actively encouraged his artistic inclinations.
She bought him pianos, right?
Yes, his piano playing, his creativity, she was his champion. But on the other side, casting a massive shadow over everything, you have his grandfather, James Omar Cole.
And Porter himself later described this man plainly as a tyrant.
And that tyranny wasn't just a vague, old-fashioned strictness. James Omar Cole was one of the wealthiest men in Indiana.
Like a robber baron type.
Very much so. A timber and mining baron. A man of brutal Gilded Age industry who expected his grandson to become a rugged lawyer and businessman.
So a kid playing show tunes on the piano was not going to fly.
He viewed Cole's musical leanings with absolute contempt.
Oh, wow.
And the source text includes this chilling, highly specific detail about their dynamic.
Oh, I remember this part. It's so intense.
It is. The grandfather would literally take young Cole, physically point toward the bleak, miserable county poorhouse in their town, and warn the boy with absolute seriousness. That is the place you will end up.
Wait, I really want to sit with that for a second because it's just so dark.
It's terrifying for a child.
His own grandfather points at an actual physical poorhouse, which, let's remember, in the late 19th century was basically a prison for the destitute, filled with disease and absolute misery.
Literal nightmare.
And he says to a child, if you don't toe the line, if you fail my expectations, I will let you rot in there. That is beyond heavy.
You have to imagine the crushing psychological weight of a billionaire patriarch threatening a sensitive, artistic child with total destitution.
Does this mean his entire glittering, cosmopolitan, champagne-sipping persona was basically just a massive trauma response?
So it's a very modern way to look at it, but yeah.
Like, was his entire life just an elaborate way to financially and socially guarantee he never, ever ended up in that poorhouse?
It goes deeper than just a simple trauma response, though the trauma was undoubtedly the foundational architecture of his personality.
Also.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of his psychological development, when a child is threatened with total societal and financial annihilation by the most powerful figure in their known universe, it produces a profound, permanent sensitivity to expectation.
So he was always hyper-aware of what people expected of him.
Yes. Porter developed an intense desire to please, absolutely. But more critically, he developed a deep, unshakable determination never to be vulnerable to falling.
To never let his guard down.
Exactly. He learned incredibly early on how to present himself advantageously just to survive.
Right.
He had to learn how to charm, how to succeed socially, and how to manipulate environments where judgment was constant, and the stakes, at least in his own mind, were absolute survival.
So by the time he escaped to Yale,
He was already this fully formed figure of polish and ease, moving seamlessly among fashionable and exclusive circles.
so that rippling laughter, that charm we were just marveling at in Venice.
It wasn't an accident of genetics. It was a constructed survival mechanism. He built an impenetrable armor out of wit and elegance.
An armor made of wit and elegance. That completely reframes the guy sitting across from you at this hypothetical Venetian party.
It changes everything.
A minute ago, you were just laughing at his jokes.
Hold on.
Now you realize the jokes are the reinforced steel walls of a fortress.
Exactly right.
And that brings us to a crucial question. If his public persona is this highly protective, heavily constructed armor, what on earth did his actual unguarded emotional life look like?
A lot of people assumed he didn't have one.
Because there is a huge lingering misconception about Cole Porter. People look at his lyrical cynicism, the attitude in songs like Anything Goes or just one of those things.
Where love is just a passing fad.
Right. Where everything is fleeting and nothing really matters. And they assume that meant he was emotionally detached in real life.
That he was just a cold, glittering surface all the way down.
But the source material completely torches that cynic myth, doesn't it?
It absolutely dismantles it, and it uses his most private, guarded letters to do so.
Oh, the letters again?
Yes, these letters prove conclusively that the interior was not empty, it was roiling.
Roiling.
When you examine his correspondence with the Russian dancer Boris Kokno, for instance, the tone shifts so dramatically from that public lightness that it's almost jarring.
What does he say?
Well, the editors of his letters note a, quote, particular sincerity and anguish in these French love letters to Kokno.
Anguish. That's not a word you associate with Cole Porter.
Not at all. He writes of deep yearning, of the pain of separation. That is not the voice of the guy casually shrugging his shoulders and singing anything goes.
No, that is a voice that is quiet, desperate, and incredibly exposed.
He felt things with an intensity that would have shocked his casual party guests.
And we see that immense depth of feeling in his relationship with his wife, Linda, too.
Really do.
Now, in popular history, their marriage is often cynically written off as just an arrangement of convenience. A classic lavender marriage, so a gay man and a wealthy divorcee could both live their lives in high society with a shield of respectability.
Which was a very real thing.
Right. Could you quickly explain the mechanics of why that was so necessary in the 1920s before we talk about their actual bond?
Certainly. In the high society of the 1910s and 20s, a lavender marriage was a marriage of convenience utilized to conceal the socially stigmatized sexual orientation of one or both partners.
Because it was incredibly dangerous back then.
For a gay man like Porter, openly living his truth would have meant social ostracization, the absolute end of his mainstream career, and potentially severe legal consequences.
And what about for Linda?
For Linda, who was a stunningly beautiful, incredibly wealthy, but older divorcee who had suffered abuse in her first marriage, marrying Cole offered her companionship.
And safety, I imagine.
Yes, safety from predatory fortune hunters and a shared love of art, travel, and high society without the demands of a traditional, oppressive, patriarchal marriage.
So it provided them both an impenetrable fortress of societal respectability.
Exactly. But the text violently argues against the simplification that it was just a loveless business arrangement.
Right, because they genuinely loved each other.
It highlights the striking depth of feeling he had for her. When she suffered severe health issues later in life, his anxiety over her well-being was all-consuming.
Oh, wow.
It was a partnership sustained by profound, genuine care.
And we see another angle of his heart in his correspondence with the young Marine, Nelson Barclift, during World War II, right?
Yes, the text notes Porter showed this, quote, almost paternal concern for him.
Which is amazing. The guy famous for writing songs about mischievous, carefree seduction is simultaneously sitting at his desk, agonizing, protecting, and offering fatherly advice to this young man in a war zone.
It's a beautiful contrast. What emerges from all of this deeply personal evidence is a portrait not of a cynic devoid of feeling, but of a man who possessed immense, sometimes overwhelming feeling.
But he just didn't show it.
Right. He vastly preferred to manage that feeling. He abhorred the idea of his raw, messy emotions spilling out in public.
Probably going back to that fear of losing control from his childhood.
Exactly. The emotional chaos of real life was simply too dangerous, too unpredictable perhaps, echoing back to that total loss of control threatened by his grandfather.
So what did he do with all that emotion?
He poured that intense emotion into the music. In his art, every feeling, every note, every syllable could be placed exactly where he wanted it.
Because art was safe?
Art was safe because art could be controlled.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener, right?
Yeah.
You're sitting on a velvet sofa next to him at this party.
In Venice.
In Venice.
Yeah.
The jazz band has gone home. The party is dying down. It's 3 a.m. And you try to have a real, deep, emotional, heart-to-heart conversation with Cole Porter. What actually happens?
Wow.
Like, if you pour your heart out to him, does his armor go up? Does he ice you out for crossing a boundary?
He wouldn't ice you out. And that is precisely where his genius for social management shines brightest.
Oh, really?
By all accounts, he was a mesmerizing listener. He would listen to your confession with total attention.
Oh.
However, if you attempted to turn that lens back onto him, if you asked him a deeply personal question about his own interior life, he would reveal himself highly selectively.
You wouldn't just spill his guts.
Never. If you offered a heavy, dramatic confession, he had this incredible conversational agility to absorb it, acknowledge it, and then effortlessly reframe it into a gentle joke or a profound philosophical quip.
Classic deflection.
Deflection but so elegantly done, you would walk away from the sofa feeling completely validated, feeling like you had just shared a beautiful, intimate moment.
But she hadn't really.
Exactly. Hours later, when you thought about it in your cab ride home, you would realize you never actually reached his absolute center.
Yeah, and that's tricky.
He gave you just enough of his truth to satisfy your emotional hunger while keeping his core entirely protected.
So it wasn't coldness. It was masterful self-preservation.
Exactly.
That is such a fascinating, slightly haunting dynamic. You feel completely seen by him, but he remains hidden in plain sight.
Hidden in plain sight is the perfect way to put it.
Yeah, we've talked endlessly about how he managed his emotions through his art. I want to transition to the actual physical creation of that art.
The music.
Yes, because if you are lucky enough to be at a gathering with Cole Porter, eventually, inevitably, the moment arrives. He's going to sit down at the piano.
Everyone's waiting for it.
And here, the source text shatters another massive myth about him, the myth of absolute effortlessness.
This is one of my favorite parts of the text.
When you listen to a song like You're the Top, the rhymes are so incredibly clever, so bouncy, they feel like they must have just popped into his head fully formed while he was buttering his toast.
Like he just breathed them out.
But the reality of his craft was entirely different, wasn't it?
The reality of his process was agonizingly deliberate.
Agonizingly.
Yes. The text describes his surviving musical manuscripts as revealing a slow, careful, borderline obsessive craftsman.
Like lots of erasures and scribbles.
The notes on his page are described as being almost engraved into the paper.
Oh, wow. He pressed down that hard.
He was meticulous. He was endlessly patient. That offhand brilliance that we all associate with him, the sparkling wit that seemed to just float on the air, was actually the result of intense, sustained, grueling effort.
So it was work. Hard work.
He would rework a single line dozens of times to ensure it sounded like it was a spontaneous thought.
We have to dive into this because this is exactly what the Porter-Pedia book is all about.
Right, the 2,600 references.
Yes. Our listeners know he used over 2,600 cultural references in his songs. Let's look at how he actually crafted these. Take You're the Top. The rhyme scheme in that song is mind-bending.
It's a masterclass.
He rhymes Mahatma Gandhi with Napoleon Brandy, but he also rhymes the nimble tread of the feet of Fred Astaire with an O'Neill drama and Whistler's Mama and Camembert.
It's just absurdly brilliant.
To the listener, it sounds like a breathless list of things he just happens to like. But musically and rhythmically, how is he making these massive, disparate ideas fit together so flawlessly?
He achieves it through a profound understanding of syllabic rhythm and internal rhyme, combined with a merciless editing process.
Merciless.
Consider the sheer structural disparity between Mahatma Gandhi and Napoleon Brandy. He isn't just rhyming the N-words.
Right.
He has to perfectly match the stress patterns of the syllables preceding them to ensure the singer doesn't stumble.
Oh, because if the rhythm is off, the joke dies?
Exactly. He would sit at his desk, surrounded by reference books, dictionaries, and rhyming guides, plotting these lyrics like a mathematician solving a proof.
So he didn't just pluck Camembert out of the air.
No, he actively searched for an unexpected, high-culture European reference that would perfectly counterbalance the American pop culture references, creating a lyrical whiplash that delights the brain.
It's so calculated.
He was agonizing over the placement of a comma, the duration of a rest, the exact vowel sound of a punchline, because he knew that comedy and music relies entirely on the precision of timing.
It totally recontextualizes him. We picture a guy casually tossing off lyrics at a cocktail party, but the reality is a guy locked in his study, grinding his teeth.
Writing and rewriting the same 4 bars of music 50 times until the joints are completely invisible.
And the text notes this perfectionism extended into his professional relationships on Broadway, too.
It did.
But surprisingly, despite his wealth and his meticulous nature, he wasn't this solitary, brooding, tyrannical genius locking himself in an ivory tower.
No, not at all.
The source describes him as a highly engaged, remarkably flexible collaborator. He cared deeply about the minutiae, but he didn't just blindly impose his will on his librettists or his pit musicians.
It's a crucial distinction. The text explicitly points out that while he was incredibly demanding, because you simply cannot achieve that level of refinement without holding everyone around you to terrifyingly high standards, he was not a tyrant.
He just wanted the best.
He valued the excellence of the final product far more than his own ego.
That's rare in showbiz.
Very rare. If a singer suggested that a lyric was too difficult to breathe through, he didn't throw a tantrum.
He didn't say, "I'm Cole Porter, deal with it."
No, he listened, he adjusted the vowel sounds, he rewrote the measure. He understood that a song only works if the performer can inhabit it naturally.
Okay, so let's go back into our Venetian Palazzo.
Right, back to the party.
He has finally sat down at the piano. The room goes dead silent. You are expecting a massive virtuosic performance. You're expecting Gershwin, right?
Yeah, big hands, loud chords.
You expect him to aggressively attack the keys, a cigar in his mouth, delivering a booming Broadway showstopper. But the text says his playing was nothing like that.
It was very different.
It describes his piano playing as sparse. It was rhythmically steady, incredibly economical.
It wasn't showing off.
No, he used the piano strictly as a vehicle to support the lyric, not as a tool to show off his technical prowess and his singing voice.
Oh, his voice was fascinating.
It wasn't this booming baritone. It was modest. It was conversational. It was a voice suited for small, private, velvet-lined rooms, not for belting to the back row of the massive Winter Garden Theater.
And that profound intimacy was exactly the point of his performance style.
I mean,
He wasn't trying to overwhelm you with vocal acrobatics or sweeping arpeggios. He was communicating directly with you.
like a one-on-one conversation.
When he sat at the piano and sang his own songs, it was less a musical performance and more an incredibly witty musical conversation. By keeping his volume low and his playing sparse, he utilized that same social physics we discussed earlier.
The gravity of silence.
Exactly. He forced the audience to physically lean closer to the piano to catch the subtle nuance and the clever turn of phrase of the lyric.
I just love this mental image. We picture him as this grand, unapproachable maestro. But in reality, it sounds almost like an acoustic indie set in a friend's living room.
Yeah, very unplugged.
He's pulling you into a secret, whispering a musical joke just for you, rather than belting out a showstopper at the audience. It makes those 2,600 references feel so much more personal, like inside jokes between two sophisticated friends.
It really does.
But of course, creating that intimate, perfectly tailored environment, surrounding yourself with grand pianos, velvet sofas, endless champagne, and renting Venetian palazzos, none of that comes cheap.
It certainly does not.
And this brings us to the most shocking, paradigm-shifting revelation in the entire source text. It's the secret anxiety that undermines everything we think we know about him.
This changes everything.
We all imagine Cole Porter as a man who floated high above something as utterly mundane and vulgar as paying bills. But the text drops an absolute bombshell on that assumption.
It truly does, and it fundamentally alters our understanding of his drive.
What does the text reveal?
The source reveals unequivocally that Porter, quote, spent most of his adult life worrying about money.
What? That is crazy.
That is a direct quote from the biographical profile. Despite his marriage to a wealthy woman, and despite the massive success of his shows, his lifestyle was so astronomically expensive that he was constantly living on the edge of a financial precipice.
Like spending money faster than he could make it.
Exactly. The text notes there were times when he actually sacrificed his own financial stability, pouring his own money into his shows.
Why would he do that?
To ensure the orchestrations, the sets, and the costumes were exactly up to his obsessive standards.
Oh, because the studio wouldn't pay for it.
Right. This completely shatters the illusion of the carefree aristocrat who just wrote songs as a leisurely hobby.
Here's where it gets really interesting for me. Think about the profound irony of this.
Oh, it's deeply ironic.
This is the man who literally wrote the soundtrack for the carefree, elite upper crust of the 20th century. He's the musical voice of generational wealth.
Yes.
Yet, the man soundtracking the yachts, the private trains, and the flowing champagne was secretly sweating over his bank statements in his study?
Terrified of going broke.
Does this mean his songs about wealth and luxury, all those glittering references to high society, were actually aspirational or even deeply secretly ironic?
That's a great theory.
Like, was he writing about a world that he felt he was constantly on the verge of losing?
That is a brilliant and highly supported way to interpret his catalog. The elegance of his life, the legendary parties, the trips to Paris, the custom tailoring, the exquisite dining, none of it was simply a given.
It wasn't just handed to him on a silver platter.
It wasn't an endless, magically replenishing well of wealth. It was a highly curated lifestyle that had to be fiercely, exhaustively maintained.
And keeping that up must have been stressful.
Maintaining it required immense attention, endless calculation, and yes, deep, grinding anxiety.
Wow.
The man who wrote so effortlessly about pleasure was quietly, constantly aware of the exact cost of that pleasure.
It entirely reframes his existence.
It really does. When he was sitting at that party, enjoying a perfect vintage wine or a flawless meal, he wasn't just indulging carelessly like a spoiled prince.
Who was calculating?
He was appreciating it as a hyper-aware connoisseur who knew exactly how many hit songs he had to write to keep that wine flowing.
And that hyper-awareness brings up the inevitable question of snobbery, which the text tackles head-on.
It's a question you have to ask.
Right. Was Cole Porter a snob? And the answer the text provides is basically, yes, absolutely, but with a massive, crucial caveat.
What's the caveat?
It was an aesthetic snobbery, not a moral one. He belonged to this world of extreme refinement, and he demanded a certain level of polish from his environment.
He had standards.
He wasn't interested in clumsiness or dullness or people who didn't appreciate the finer details of life. But crucially, he wasn't cruel to people who lacked it. He simply wasn't interested in engaging with them.
Right, he wouldn't insult you, he just wouldn't invite you to the party.
Exactly. He was famously a bon vivant, but his enjoyment of life was entirely active. It was about noticing, dissecting, and appreciating the quality of things, not just mindless, gluttonous consumption.
His snobbery was a symptom of his hyper-observance. He was always noticing, always refining, always adjusting the details.
Which goes back to the tailoring, the manicures.
That is the core beating mechanism of his personality. He shaped his physical and social environment just as meticulously, just as agonizingly as he shaped the lyrics on his sheet music.
So everything was curated.
To be allowed into his presence was to be allowed inside a living environment entirely curated by his flawless taste.
So we have finally reached the end of our hypothetical evening. Let's synthesize this entire encounter.
Let's do it.
We've walked into the roaring Venetian palazzo. We've noticed his slight, impeccable frame holding the center of the room.
The black hole of attention?
Yes. We've been drawn in by the quiet transatlantic voice, and we've been bathed in that perfectly calibrated, endlessly tuned charm.
Right.
We've watched him sit at the piano, pulling us into his confidence with a sparse conversational melody, and now we know the hidden financial panics and the deep, heavily managed emotional anguish swirling underneath that perfect tuxedo.
It's a lot to process.
The sun is coming up over the canal as you walk out of the palazzo, you step back onto your gondola, and you look back at the windows. What is your ultimate takeaway from meeting your hero?
What does the text say?
The source text summarizes it beautifully. It says you would meet a man of unparalleled elegance, charm, and precision. You would feel entirely seen by him, but you would know you are not fully admitted into his soul.
Kept at arm's length.
Exactly. You certainly wouldn't be disappointed, but you wouldn't be entirely satisfied either.
This raises an important question, perhaps the most vital philosophical question of all, when dealing with a highly managed figure like Cole Porter.
Ready for it?
Was it all just a disguise? Did you just spend an incredible evening with a magnificent fake?
Oh, that's the million-dollar question.
And the text argues passionately and convincingly that the answer is no.
He wasn't fake.
He didn't hide behind a mask, he lived within it.
Wow.
The agonizing effort behind the elegance was genuine. The financial anxiety, the grueling craftsmanship, the endless tuning of his personality to make you feel comfortable, that was his authentic self.
So the performance was the reality.
The curated performance wasn't a lie designed to cover up the truth. The performance was the truth. When you met the glittering persona, you were meeting the actual man.
That is so profound. The mask was the man.
It really was.
If you managed to rip away the tuxedo, the wit, and the charm, you wouldn't find some totally different, messy, ordinary guy hiding behind a curtain.
No, you just find the raw machinery that powered the charm.
The man who cared enough to construct that perfect evening for you, to tune his charm exactly to your frequency so you felt special, to agonizingly write those lyrics and play them so intimately for you, that was the real, authentic Cole Porter.
He worked so hard for his audience, even if the audience was just one person.
And so to bring it all the way back to where we started, that old warning about never meeting your heroes.
Right, the fear of disappointment.
I think in the case of Cole Porter, the listener's hero would definitely not disappoint. Instead, he would intrigue you with his incredible layered complexity.
You'd be fascinated.
He would give you an unforgettable evening, but he would leave you wanting more. Which, as we know, is the absolute mark of a truly fascinating human being.
It is the ultimate rule of showmanship, applied to human interaction. Leave them wanting more, even in a private conversation.
Absolutely. Now, before we sign off, I have to remind you one more time.
Yes, do not forget the book.
If this deep dive into the man behind the music sparked your curiosity, and if you want to know exactly how he managed to rhyme O'Neill drama with Whistler's Mama, you absolutely must pick up a copy of the Porter-Pedia book.
It's essential reading.
It is a massive, incredibly detailed treasure trove that explores and explains all 2,600 cultural references Cole Porter uses in his legendary songs. You won't want to miss it. It adds so much color and context to the lyrics we all know and love.
It really brings the music to life.
But I want to leave you with a final, lingering idea to mull over today as you go about your week.
Something to think about.
We've talked extensively about how Cole Porter's entire existence was about noticing, refining, and actively adjusting his personality to control his environment and stave off vulnerability.
Right.
He meticulously curated himself to survive, to thrive, and to be loved. It makes you wonder, in our modern era, where absolutely everyone curates a flawless digital persona, where we all filter our photos, draft our captions, and tune our online presence to project exactly what we want the world to see.
Oh, that's a really interesting parallel.
Have we all just unconsciously adopted Cole Porter's survival mechanism?
Yeah.
And if the mask really does become the man, who are we when the audience finally goes home?
That is a great question to leave on.
Thank you so much for joining us for this special deep dive. Keep asking questions, keep looking past the surface, and we will see you next time.